All right. Well, we are ready to begin, and we are picking up with Matthew chapter 12. We're moving along through Matthew at a fairly decent clip, considering it's such a big book, and we only do a half hour at a time. So, Matthew 12, verse 1. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." He said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for him to eat, nor those who were with him, but only the priests. Or have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. And if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." Okay. As I worked my way through this, and as I was preparing to teach on it, and then as I was just reading through it again, because I'm trying to unpack all this stuff in my mind. How do I explain this? How do I present this? How, without just bogging down in all kinds of areas that would be very easy to do. But really, there are just a couple, 2-3 major truths that are here, and they're woven together as only the master teacher on the fly can do. Okay, because this was an accusation brought to him about his disciples, not him. Doesn't say he was eating in the grain fields. They don't accuse him of eating in the grain fields. It was his disciples. Here's the big thing. The number one big takeaway is, and it very often is this case, it's where he kind of winds things up. Verse 6, I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. Okay, he's saying with that, with all of this stuff, and we'll get into it in more detail, you've forgotten or you never knew, you do not accept who it is you're dealing with. Number one, and he deals with it in 2 different ways. It's kind of an even if scenario, but number one, those rules don't apply to me. They don't apply to me. They didn't apply to David and his men, and you can go read about that in 1 Samuel 21. This is when he was on the run from Saul, and he was less than honest with the high priest, and the high priest fed him. The high priest also gave him Goliath's sword, which was kept there at the tabernacle. And then that high priest, I think it was Abiathar, it cost him his life. Saul, when he comes and finds out that he had aided and abetted David, he had him executed, which was a huge no-no to do to the high priest. But anyway, it was point being, it's a very well-known account. And no one ever, these Pharisees never once said David did anything wrong. They weren't going to say, with Bathsheba, yeah, they'd say he did something wrong. But in this case, David didn't do anything wrong. Okay. If David didn't do anything wrong in that instance, then Jesus certainly didn't do anything wrong. His disciples didn't do anything wrong. And if you want to get down into it, and this is where we could spend more than the time allotted in getting down into exactly what rules were being violated according to the Pharisees. Guess whose rules they were? They were the Pharisees' rules. They were all of the things that they came up with. They had a list. I believe that it was 637 things you couldn't do on the Sabbath. They took it to extremes. Why? because it wasn't about what it was about. For them, it was about power. It was about control. It was about obedience. And who got to be the enforcers of that obedience? They did. And who probably violated in their own homes privately where no one could see many of those rules themselves? No doubt they did. Why? Because they're tyrannical hypocrites. Does that spark any ideas of things you see in the world around you now? Who wears a mask? Who doesn't wear a mask when no one's looking, right? It's the same thing. But these are their rules. They weren't God's rules. God's rules had no problem with the disciples. It's in Exodus about eating some heads of grain in the field. You can't harvest with a scythe that way, but you could eat heads of grain from your neighbor's field. And it didn't matter what day it was. God didn't want people being hungry. Here's another thing, another level of understanding with this, because we get it wrong. We just do, generally, by default. What was the Sabbath about? Jesus explained it. I think it was last week. We covered it. Come unto me, all you who are weary and burdened. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart, and you will find what? Rest. Rest for your souls. The Sabbath, people were to stop from their normal labors and rest in anticipation of the true rest, the blessed rest, the eternal rest, the Eden restored rest, Eden where you don't have to pull weeds and you don't have to hope that you get enough moisture for your crops to grow and all the fret and worry and anxiety. It was about that rest, looking ahead to that, and the one through whom that rest would be given. Jesus says in another place, you search the scriptures, but it is they that testify about me. They're accusing him, absurdity of absurdities. They are accusing him of violating the day that was about him. As a kid, what was one of the neat things? Did you have to do any dishes on your birthday? No. Did you have to do your chores on your birthday? No. As an adult, you do, right? But as a kid, you did. Well, this day was about, why? Because the day was about you. The day was about you. The Sabbath is about Jesus. They're accusing him of violating the day that's about him. How whacked out, absurd, idiotic, ludicrous can you get? This is it. And it drives home an important truth that we'll see again and again. We've seen it before. We'll see it repeatedly. Unbelief doesn't make any sense. Hostility toward God doesn't make any sense. Being angry at the one who comes to fulfill everything you supposedly have hoped for and are waiting for doesn't make any sense. So you can't expect irrational thinking to produce rational actions or speech. You just can't. And Jesus gives other examples. The priests go in the temple and do things that are work on the Sabbath, and no one accuses them of breaking the law. It's absurd. That would be absurd. Why? Because the things they did, the sacrifices they did, were about faithfulness and mercy, chesed, kindness. That's what the Sabbath is about, focusing on that. And Jesus makes this very important point, and he says it in a couple different instances, things similar to this. Something greater than the temple is here. I'm bigger than all of this. That's why you're getting it wrong. You don't realize who I am. You're fighting against it. And we'll see to what degree they fight against it soon. You're fighting against it with all your will, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And you've made up your own rules. And rules always become about what? Enforcing the rules. Just like bureaucracy. It exists to make sure that it continues to exist. It's why it never goes away. It never goes away. It's like in What About Bob, when the Richard Dreyfuss opens the door and says, he's not gone. Bob's never gone. And he opens the door and there's Bob looking confused about why he slammed the door in his face. Rules never go away. Those who want rules always want more rules. And because those rules don't work, they want to come up with more rules. And really, it's always the same thing. It's about them being in power. Those Pharisees had power. They had power in their society that only members of Congress have today. They were above it all. And this guy was undoing it all. And if he undoes it, where does that leave them? Where does that leave them? Nowhere. Nowhere. They weren't going to allow for the humility of faith. The humility of faith is this. It starts out with me being a sinful wretch and needing God himself to die for me. And then it leads right to submitting myself to him, offering myself as a living sacrifice to him to do what he wants me to do, when he wants me to do it, where he wants me to do it, following his lead. Faith is a hand-in-hand walk with God, but I'm not the one pulling on him, telling him, taking him where I want to go. It's the other way around. And they didn't want to have anything to do with it. And therefore, they didn't care what Hosea 6:6 said about mercy and not sacrifice. And if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, verse 7, you would not have condemned the guiltless. The most important thing, that God's about forgiveness. All the stuff in the temple, it foreshadowed the forgiveness that came in Christ. It was about mercy, and they turned it into something else. In so doing, they constantly, in this case, obviously, but constantly condemned the guiltless. They loaded people's consciences down with burdens that they didn't begin to bear themselves, that they didn't begin to carry. Why? Because they deceived themselves. They lied to themselves, thinking that they're above it all. The hoi polloi, they need this stuff. The goyim, they need this stuff, not us. We're above it all. We've got our fancy robes and we strut around and we're important. And when we speak, everyone listens and we never sit in the back. That's who we are. We make the rules. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. The Sabbath answers to me. It serves me. It's about me. So that theme that we see again, it's one of the many recurring colors, if you will, in the tapestry of the Gospel of Matthew, and how God used that man, that Jewish man, to present the gospel to Jews. Things are explained in ways that made sense to Jewish believers and people who would be Jewish believers. Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. And I'll say again, the way Matthew is portrayed in The Chosen, which season 2 starts on Sunday night. Whoop, 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 whoop. Have you watched it, Brandon?
Yeah.
Isn't it great?
I loved it.
I just watched the trailer for season 2. It's on YouTube. I did it while I was sitting here getting things ready to go. The guy who plays Matthew is fascinating. It's a very interesting portrayal. We continue. He went on from there and entered their synagogue, still the same day. And the man was there with a withered hand. And they asked him, who do you think they is? They, them, it's them, they. They asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? What do they think they're doing? Who do they think they are? Just by the way this is done, they're the ones who investigate. They're the ones who decide whether something is right or not. And they're testing this yokel from Nazareth who operates out of Capernaum. It's like saying he's from Tennessee and he operates in Kentucky. Sorry for anybody out there who's from either one of those. That's where all my family's from. But we all know how all the rest of the world thinks about Tennessee and Kentucky. right? It's like Jesus was born in Tennessee in the hills and moved to Kentucky, just like my grandmother. Nobody. And they're asking him, examining him as though they are the greater and he is the lesser. And he answers to them because they're the ones in authority and they're in power. Why? So they might accuse him. Because here he is in the synagogue where everybody came to hear what? The word that was about whom? Jesus, the Messiah who was to come, the plan of salvation, Eden that would be restored. He said to them, which one of you who has a sheep, if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not take hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value is a man than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And the man stretched it out, and it was restored, healthy like the other. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him, how to destroy him. Now, there's something that perhaps even you, as you're hearing that and thinking about it, and chances are you've heard it many times, that you didn't think about as they went out to conspire how to destroy him. Jesus had just had compassion on this poor guy who had a withered hand. A withered hand. I don't even know what that is. It probably, I would guess maybe it had been crushed or something like that, and it had just ankylosed up and atrophied, and it was a useless non-appendage that was still there reminding him of what he had lost. And in a world where 95% of the people earned their bread by manual labor, where do you think that left this guy? Hey, I'm stopping by Home Depot to hire some day laborers to build my deck. Oh, there's a guy with one arm. I think I'll hire him. He's probably got a good attitude. No, this guy's life had been miserable the whole time because, and even if all those things weren't true, he'd been crippled for who knows how long. It doesn't tell us that. What else might you notice here that's interesting? What doesn't Jesus do? What doesn't he do? He didn't make mud and rub it on the guy's hand. He didn't reach out and touch him. He didn't do any of that. What did he do? He told the guy to stretch out his hand. And he stretched it out, and it was healthy, just like the other one. Of what could they accuse him? What had he done? He told the guy, in effect, show me your hand, stretch out your hand, stretch it out. Do what you couldn't do before. Another way to think of it, do what you couldn't do before, stretch out your hand. And there it was. Can you imagine seeing that? Can you imagine seeing that transformation? Could you imagine how you would feel for that guy? Joy. How could you not feel joy? God's grace had been bestowed on this guy. And what is the Pharisees and the scribes, because it was, those two before. And remember, and I repeat these things, I know many of you probably know it, but always allow for the possibility that people don't. The order of things, we're talking Pharisees and scribes. Pharisees weren't priests. Pharisees were laymen. Pharisees were laymen who had enough money that they could be kind of like lay people, holy men. They were part of the ruling class, and because they had money, they funded the scribes. The scribes worked for them. The scribes were the ones who made copies of the scriptures. Yet there was quite the rigorous protocol, training, internship. To become a scribe, you had to have a sponsor. You had to have a sponsor. So the scribes were the experts in the law. And when we talk about experts, we're talking about you could give them 3 words in a row from the Hebrew Old Testament, and they could tell you where it was. the really good ones. That they were fanatical experts on the law. The problem was it became about the written word, which is very important. The written word and the accuracy of transcribing it accurately, copying it accurately, all of that very important. But it's what the written word is about, who the written word is about. And it's always a danger in theology. And I used to be in the box I'm about to describe. You can be so focused on being right, making sure that you've got the doctrine down pat, and that's important. But don't forget who it is you're right about. Don't forget what it is that you're right about. You're right about grace and mercy and compassion and forgiveness. And if you're warring against that, then when you see a miracle like this, you might just find yourself out with some other guys foaming at the mouth, talking about how to destroy this guy who keeps doing this nice stuff and making you look bad. He's playing in our playground. You know, I was putting up, do videos on different things, as hopefully you know, Revelation and Exodus are two of the others that I'm doing right now. And I was talking in the video that went up today, and it's on Exodus 6:10 through 7:13. If you want to go look that up. I was talking about how when Moses went to Pharaoh, and God told him what he had to go do. And Moses knew those halls of power. He knew where he was walking. He'd lived there. He grew up there. And he knew that no one had ever gone in and told Pharaoh what to do. It's kind of the same thing here. Nobody told these guys they were wrong. Maybe the Romans would and push them around. That's portrayed accurately in The Chosen. Maybe the Romans would, but no one in Jewish society would. The Sadducees would spat with them. It was like Democrats and Republicans, but the Sadducees were the priests. Nobody humiliated these guys. No one disagreed with them in public, ever. And Jesus, just by doing the right thing, it's not Jesus' aim and intent to make them look foolish. It just happens. Why? Because they're warring against the light of the world. They're trying to put out that bright light. And they're in the darkness, and they want to stay in the dark, and so they skitter away like rats and try to figure out how they can come back and get him the next time. All right. God's chosen servant. And again, this is Matthew. This is the guy who's writing his gospel with a Jewish audience, right? Jesus, aware of this, he knew they were out to get him. And this is about a year before the events of Holy Week, right? It was about a year away from that time. We know that because the grains were in harvest, so it was probably April, about a year ahead from when he was supposed to, knew he was going to die. So Jesus, aware of this, that they were trying to figure out how to destroy him, and that didn't mean they were trying to undo him politically. No holds barred, cage match, whatever it takes, he's got to go. And he wasn't here to war against them. Jesus, aware of this, withdrew from there, and many followed him, and he healed them all. Who did he heal? He healed them all. If you were sick, you got healed. You had demons, he cast them out. And ordered them not to make him known. He wasn't trying to pick a fight. He wasn't trying to be famous. It's not what he was about. He healed people. He had compassion on people because he had compassion on people. If you've got $1 million in your pocket and you see some hungry people, chances are you're going to buy them a cheeseburger. If you see sick and dying people suffering with no medical care, lying in the street with bed sores on the mat in the dirt, chances are you're going to heal them because you can. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. Now, as I read through this, we're almost out of time, but be thinking about, he's not there to fight. He's not there to put the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes and the Herodians down and put them in their place. He's there to work God's mission of salvation, to bring it to fulfillment. And so the way he operates is shaped by that. He didn't come to fight with them. He came to save them. And some of them would come to believe. In the book of Acts, we see that there were Pharisees among the believers. You can correct people. You know, out on the social platforms I'm on, I'll have people who come, they're on a Christian group so that they can take shots at things. And when I respond to them, I try to do so in love. Why? Because I'm not trying to blow them out of the water. I'm hoping that what I say might bear fruit eventually. Somewhere down the road, the Holy Spirit might use it. It's not about winning. It's about saving. Behold, my servant, this is from the prophet Isaiah, whom I have chosen, my beloved, with whom my soul is well pleased. This is the Father speaking. I will put my spirit upon him, and he will proclaim justice to the Gentiles. He will not quarrel or cry out, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. He's not there to fight. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not quench. A bruised reed is a reed that's kind of, you know, it's been blown in the wind quite a bit, maybe a boat bumped up against it, and it's kind of bent a little bit. He's not there to snap it off. He's not there to put out the smoldering wick. He wants to fan it to flame. He wants to bind up that reed and let it grow and continue until he brings justice to victory. God's justice that the downtrodden are cared for, until he brings justice to victory, and in his name, the Gentiles will hope. So it goes beyond the people of Israel onto the Gentiles. The Gentiles are, another way of saying that is, the nations. The nations. God chose one nation so that in working the plan of salvation, then that plan, that message of salvation, once it was accomplished, could go to all the nations so that all would be saved. But Matthew, he's always going to tie it in with the scriptures. He's always going to refer to the scriptures. And here it's a very long quote that he gives about the character and the mode of operation of the Messiah. And we can think of, we just had Palm Sunday last week. You know, he comes to Jerusalem how? Gentle and riding on a colt, the foal of a donkey. You know, it's how a servant king came to a people who had been come under his power in whatever way. He's saying, I'm here to serve. I'm here to enforce justice. I'm here to help the downtrodden. I'm here to be here for you. And isn't that ideally what we want in our leaders, and what is all too often sorely lacking? But it's certainly, we're blessed to have it in our Savior, that is what he is about. And doesn't that tie in with the other things we've talked about mercy? If you focus on mercy, guess what? You're not going to have a whole lot of sins to make sacrifice for. You know, it's about mercy. Well, thank you all for joining. Hope this was a blessing. We do this. We've got a series on Matthew, half hour. We've got a series on Exodus. Those are about an hour. And also a series on Revelation. Would love you to smash that like button, subscribe, and share. God bless, and have a great day. That concludes our broadcast for today. We publish our videos on YouTube, BitChute, and Brighteon. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give us a like or a thumbs up. We invite you to subscribe so you can continue to receive our content. Also, please consider sharing this video with others. We love to hear from you, so please leave a comment below. This is Matthias 76, and together we will continue to decode the deception.